Hello, Craftsmen Online listeners. In this episode of The Reading Room, we will be exploring the Bhagavad Gita, introduced and translated by Eknath Easwaran. The Bhagavad Gita itself is a selection from the longest epic poem in existence, the Mahabharata. Though debate exists among scholars as to the exact date of its ancient origin as spoken word, evidence of its earliest written form are preserved in the Spritzer manuscript that dates back to around the 2nd century Common Era. Still, the Lord's Song, or Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit, has been preserved and embraced as a cornerstone of Hindu scripture and Eastern spiritual philosophy for over 2 millennia. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Brother Jason Walter Short from the Grand Lodge of New York, and on behalf of Craftsmen Online, the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Masonic Library, and our most worshipful Grand Master Stephen Adam Rubin, I thank you for tuning in and hope you enjoy the show. Joining us in today's conversation is our special guest and most recently appointed Grand Chaplain in the state of New York, Right Worshipful Brother Yatri Trivedi. Brother Yatri, tell us a little about yourself and your connection with the Bhagavad Gita.
I'm Brother Yatri Trivedi. I'm a past master of Joshua Lodge number 890 out of New York. I have the distinct honor of being named as the first Hindu Grand Chaplain for New York as well. And I'm also a member of an observant lodge in New Jersey, Inspiratus number 357. I've been a Mason about 7 years. But a lot of it feels familiar, plodding on ahead, because it just grabs me so much. I'm also a pundit, so I perform religious services for brothers and sisters of the Hindu faith. I get to be a preceptor for whatever their ritual needs might be. And I'm excited to talk about the Gita today. It is just a phenomenal text. I remember the first time when I heard the words of the Gita. I was a young boy. I was watching my grandmother. She had put on B.R. Chopra's rendition of the Mahabharata on TV. I was watching alongside with her. And the words with their gravitas in scene really captured me. And from there, I started studying the text with her.
And now, let's meet our guest readers.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Michael LaRocco. I am by profession the Executive Director of the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Masonic Library of Grand Lodge. And in Masonry, I am currently the Staff Officer for Nassau District, meaning that I am a Grand Steward of the Grand Lodge and I teach the education there. I'm really excited about this event because the Bhagavad Gita was part of a very powerful spiritual journey for me. Meant a lot to me, helped me on my spiritual path, and to come here and now find it in a place that we could discuss with Brother Masons and how it affected Masonry and how Masonry is affected by it. I'm really excited. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Clifford Jacobs, illustrious 33rd degree, member of the Scottish Rite Valley of New York City. Been a Mason now for 37 years, and I have a particular interest in esoteric Freemasonry, but I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion about the Bhagavad Gita.
Please, be seated. All right. Welcome, everybody. This is a very special day to get to come together and speak about the Bhagavad Gita. It's one of my favorite spiritual texts, and I know that sentiment is shared. I'd like to just jump right into it. First and foremost, have you seen the Bhagavad Gita on a Freemasonic altar before?
I think I'll go last on this one.
I've never, in my time as a Freemason, have ever seen it on the Masonic altar. I've seen other things, like Ifa from, the Yoruba religion, but I've never seen the Gita.
Michael?
I've seen it a couple of times. The first time I saw it was when I went to the House of the Temple. They have the King James Version of the Holy Bible. They have the Quran. They have the Tanakh, then they have the Lotus Sutra, and they have the Bhagavad Gita. And I saw like maybe two other lodges. I think Compact Lodge has it on their altar, and Floral Park Lodge just recently put it on their altar in Nassau District. So I have seen it.
So I gifted one to my lodge when I sat in the East, and we do take it out on occasion to fit our needs. But I know under Grand Lodge of India, their jurisdiction, so they open 4 of the books you mentioned. Instead of the Lotus Sutra, they use the Zoroastrian texts.
Interesting.
Because we have a large Parsi community. But on every altar, all 5 are always opened.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, my first experience with seeing it on the altar was at St. John's Lodge 11, where Right Worshipful Michael R.C. Was past master of. They had it opened on the altar along with the Quran and the Holy Bible. And the reason I ask the question is I think that there's a lot of brothers who don't realize that the Bhagavad Gita is considered a sacred text. And not only does it represent a huge portion of the human population, but I believe really, really does a wonderful job getting to the heart of the spiritual nature that we're all on about. What is the message of the Bhagavad Gita? What is it that you feel, Yatri, is probably the first and foremost teaching that this puts forward?
I think on a very basic level, if nothing else, even if you disagree with anything that's in there, the Bhagavad Gita puts forward that there are more than one paths that are acceptable and valid.
That's interesting. That's interesting. More than one path, as in what it gets into in speaking about the gunas, or speaking.
It talks about ritual. It talks about meditation. It talks about devotional understanding of several different kinds. And, you can pick whatever lines up with you in your circumstance best. And sometimes situation to situation even. But there's a variety of paths available. I think that's something that if you look at even just by chapter titles, you can see that there's multiple things that are layered together, and they're all different tools for us to use.
Oh, interesting.
Would you think that the terms like Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga, and Bhakti Yoga is what applies when he's saying the different paths to get through devotion,
Absolutely.
right action, meditation, and knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool.
When was the first time, Michael, that you read the Bhagavad Gita? What was your first impression?
The first time I read the Bhagavad Gita was in 1990. I went to a school in the city that wound up was a teaching led by the Shankaracharya of India, but they were doing it in an extremely American, New York way. I don't know if it's appropriate to mention the name of the school, but when I read the Gita, it was which it was fondly referred to back then. The copy was just called the Gita, spelled slightly different, and the introduction was by Yeats, which was part of a lot of esoteric schools, Theosophy, and I think the Golden Dawn. And what struck me the most about it was the most offending thing I heard at the school was in a conversation, someone said that the highest truth is that we're all one. And this got me very offended. And it wasn't until reading shortly after that, the Gita, that each chapter just slowly breaks down and says the same thing over and over again. So if I could answer the previous question, what is the message to me, the Bhagavad Gita, and the answer to your question now to me would be to quote Swami Vivekananda. When I was starting to be a Mason, people were saying there was negative things about it. When I heard that Swami Vivekananda was a Mason, that was confirmation for me that there's nothing negative about Freemasonry. He was a fully realized soul and definitely one of my mentors. And he said that every great religion has the golden rule to treat other people as you would yourself, to love thy neighbor as thyself. He said, but it's only the Hindu religion that says the reason why. And that's what I think is the message is that we're all one in God and there is no separation.
Brother Cliff?
I first came across the Gita when I was in college. I think I was much too young to comprehend its message. You know, for me, literally, it was 47 years ago, because I'm 71 now, and I wasn't a Mason or anything then. So I had it and I kept it. I knew it was important, um, and I really hadn't looked at it probably since that time. So when you suggested that we discuss this, and I went to it, I was like, oh, now I get it. I understand it. And perhaps that's because of my maturity or being a Mason or having gone through certain things in life. I found it easier to comprehend and to embrace.
Yeah. For me, also, it was not until after I'd gotten into the fraternity that it had really came onto my radar. I think it was after reading through Morals and Dogma and the Arturo de Hoyos footnotes, I feel like refers to a section, and I couldn't help but then dig a little bit further and open the door to not just the Gita itself, but the whole Mahabharata and the whole birth of Hindu philosophies, Upanishads. I was already familiar with the Dhammapada Buddhism and the fundamentals of it, but the richness of the Gita, I feel, does such a wonderful job meshing the philosophical foundations of the perennial philosophy that we're all on about with the allegorical mythology that is so beautifully well done. And since then, I've probably listened to or read the Gita at least once a month. It has been such an instrumental text for me, as well as has helped to solidify my personal faith and understanding as well. Now, Yatri, you grew up with Mahabharata and the
Sure.
Gita. For you, did you notice at some point in your life, did it take on a new form, or do you understand it differently now that you're a Mason?
Um, I wouldn't say I understand it differently as a Mason. I think I had the realization earlier in life, but growing up with it, it was definitely an interesting and integral part of the story. But the Mahabharata is not the only story. There's many Puranas. There's also the Ramayana, which is the other history of ours that we look at. And I sort of got started with the Upanishads. I think of my grandmother as my guru in that way, and that's what she had taught me from. So that's what I looked at first. And so my early understanding of the Gita was this section of revelation, essentially, under a very, I would say, very religious lens. And it wasn't until I was studying religion academically in college where it took on a different form for me, where it wasn't maybe, let's say, revolutionary in that way. It's not new. It's not giving us, if you're familiar with the Hindu corpus of texts, it's not giving you anything new per se, right? Everything that the Gita gives you can be found in other texts. What it's doing is it's combining them into one text that aligns everything for you. And so in that sense, it's kind of like it's a beginner's guide almost when you think of it that way. And from there, you get the jumping off points and things like that.
Yeah, it's really well put. Yeah, Cliff.
I have just a question for my understanding. The Gita is part of a larger work, the Mahabharata. Is the rest of the Mahabharata just as important and sacred as the Gita itself?
As a body of text, I would say it's probably comparable to a lot of the Old Testament stories for Christians.
Okay.
Obviously, Jewish brothers will take that very differently because it's their active text. But I think most Christians tend to look at those stories as being a part of where they come from and their past, even if that's not necessarily what they're using day to day as part of their teaching. And I think for us, we look at the Ramayana as well as the Mahabharata as where we come from. This is the way things were. This is the history that we have. This is, I mean, they're called itihasas or histories, literally. So to give you an idea, that's their status. And in many circles, they actually have a higher status than the Puranas, which are other devotional texts related to particular deities.
So would you say that the Mahabharata and the Gita is similar to, let's say, the whole Bible versus the Sermon on the Mount?
I think that's a fair comparison. There's a caveat there in that there is no one book for us. As Hindus, you can go your entire spiritual life and attain, state of perfection without ever even looking at the Gita, because there's so many other texts that elucidate the path for you. And there's other texts that, I mean, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, when we get to some of the verses, but they take, these schools of thought take a very different approach. And so in that way, I would say it's not as integral necessarily, although I think most Hindus will agree that it is a valid and, in a practical way, an essential book,
You mentioned the Ramayana.
Mhm.
Is that the story of Ram,
Yep.
the prior incarnation of Krishna?
Yep.
What other parts or aspects do you think are a little bit unfamiliar for a Western audience, or perhaps that either of you have found a difficult time to relating with? I know for me, there's a couple of things that are sort of alien or maybe harder to understand. Like, for instance, dharma. Like the Bhagavad Gita gets into it, and Arjuna is upset. He does not want to go in and kill all of his blood relations and his friends and his mentors, and he sits down and in tears is petitioning Krishna what to do. And Krishna, with a smile, says to Arjuna that he's running the risk of violating his dharma. What exactly then is dharma?
If I may, it's fun because that's
Yeah.
the part that kind of resonated with me a great deal. The whole idea of dharma, which I think the interpretation would be it's one's sense of duty and responsibility. Um, but what really got me was that we have we have this duty that we have to fulfill, but we can't fall in love with what the outcome of that duty is. A lot of times, one of your questions I think was to kind of look at this in terms of Freemasonry. A lot of Masons, we do things, but they want that reward at the end.
Ah.
I've done this, so where's my my title or my pin or whatever. But this is saying that you fulfill your duty without creating this sense or having the desire to get something in return for having done it. And that resonated with me quite, quite a bit.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this theme of renunciation, and a selection actually that we're going to talk about too, that Yatri has tattooed on his forearm, directly pertains to you have the right to work. But you don't have the right to the fruits of your labor. And as we appreciate perhaps what is dharma and what is your purpose or your drive, what is the governing law of your life. Like for Arjuna, it's that they are a warrior, which is different than being a Brahmin, being of the priestly class. And it's interesting in Hindu philosophy, there's such a wide berth to the castes, where people are born into something and expected that is the path that they are to pursue in their life. The Western tradition, we've moved largely away from that, and same too is my understanding that India and the Eastern traditions have tried to move away from the caste system. But in this instance, going back to our earlier question, what is the message of the Gita? It surely isn't to, if tasked with having to kill all of your relatives, go out and, and kill all of your relatives.
Yeah, you asked about dharma. Dharma
Yeah.
comes from the root dri, to
Yeah.
hold or to uphold. So dharma is which upholds us, right? And so duty, I think, is a great one aspect of that. You know, there's multiple layers to what upholds us. And I think for dharma, right, Arjuna is not just a warrior. He is simultaneously a disciple of his teacher Drona, right? He's also a husband to Draupadi and to Subhadra, right? He's also a father to, you know, Abhimanyu. So all of these roles, I mean, in our lives, we don't change roles like hats. We're kind of wearing them all at the same time. And the context is what sort of dictates what is most important in a given situation. And so dharma is that rule, it's a set of laws that dictates or helps us understand in a given situation what is relevant and what laws or duties we're bound to for that particular situation.
And I think one definition of Dharma is also truth or your truth or truth in general. So I think the point that Krishna is trying to tell him when he's referring to Dharma and your Dharma to Arjuna is that, look, these are immortal souls. You really can't kill them. And if you're in the right and you're fighting for the right, you won't take on any karma by doing your duty, what you're going to do. Not just to go around recklessly killing people, but if in the case where you have to for self-preservation or there's some kind of divine law that says that you have to be involved if you're in a war or whatever it is, that just to remember that the highest Dharma, the highest truth, is that their souls are immortal. And that if they're doing something wrong, you're going to actually help them dissolve that negative karma by doing the right thing, and that, even if it means taking their life. Not to look at it, hopefully people don't look at it as frivolously taking people's lives.
Right.
Like some of the samurais were accused of, you know, later on, just to see if that sword was sharp enough they could cut off your head, you know, which maybe is an exaggeration of that Dharma.
Sure.
Well, right, and I think when we appreciate the Bhagavad Gita, we're also appreciating the allegorical, the higher nature of the text, which is not just man against man, or man against his family, it's really man against self, man against lower self to become their higher self. The basic aspect, or for me, what I see as the underlying message of the Gita is that reintegration with a sense of being, to understand, as they put in chapter 13, the first verse of chapter 13, that you are the knower of the field. You're not the field, you're not the senses, you're not the mortal aspects of your body or ego. You're the observer. You are the unchanging, endless, and immortal aspect of everything. You know, it was really difficult to pare down
There's a lot.
what we were
Yeah.
going to talk about this evening. I really think that every chapter, every verse, we could spend hours, and there are clearly practitioners who spend their entire lives working over this text. With your help, we were able to come up with a few selections to discuss this evening from chapter 2, which was, I think we got the most submissions from chapter 2. In fact, one of the most quoted passages in the Gita is considered verses 55 through 72. And Mahatma Gandhi said that just understanding that passage alone would help to encapsulate all of the teachings into your life. But we have chosen verse 47 and verses 71 through 72 from chapter 2. From chapter 5, we picked verses 22 through 25. And from chapter 13, verse 1, which I already slightly mentioned here. I'm going to go ahead and read
Please.
those
Go ahead, please. Yeah.
passages.
Please, yes.
We'll start here. Chapter 2, verse 47. You have the right to work, but never to the fruit of work. You should never engage in action for the sake of reward, nor should you long for inaction.
So I love this verse. This was one of those verses that I read and woke something in me. He says it very, very plainly. I like that, Eswaranji actually translates the word as work. Karmani means actions. Usually you see that translated as actions, but he uses it in the working operative sense of work. And I think that is correct in the situation. He says you have a right to. Adhikara is the word. Adhikara. Adhikara, I think in a modern lens, the word entitled is a little bit more apt. You are entitled to do the work that is in your life, but you are not entitled to the results of that work. And that, at its most basic, tells you if it's worth doing, it's worth doing, whether things good or bad happen. And if it's not worth doing, then it's worth doing something else, right? And that it's that last section, do not be swayed by inaction, or do not give into not taking action, right? That leg of the last quarter of that verse is really telling, because oftentimes we think of action as something that we do or do not do, right? Yoda says, do or do not, there's no try. But there's an alternative here, where instead of doing nothing, right, you can take a different action that maybe if you realize this is wrong, I don't want to support, whatever this is, so I won't take an action that supports it. But you could take that further and engage in an action that helps fight against that, or helps support the people who are lacking from that action, right? It's a good pivoting device to understand what work really means for you in your life.
So when I was at this particular school I was talking about, the way they used to phrase what their interpretation of this text was that, and this seems to radiate in every effective spiritual tradition that people have attained enlightenment with, is to work and have your attention on doing the job at hand as magnificently as possible, but absolutely detached from the results. And they would explain it in psychophysical terms that actually this is what makes performance to the highest degree, because you cannot hit a baseball that's coming down the strike line if you're attached to the outcome. You have to be completely present, and your attention has to be completely in the moment. Same thing like playing a musical instrument or doing any sport. You have to practice it to the point where you're doing it as perfectly and as excellent as you can, completely free of the results. This is both extremely esoteric, and it's also extremely practical at the same time. I believe a lot of people will interpret that this is what Jesus meant when he said, don't let the left hand know what the right hand is doing. Maybe this is most potent in Masonry today. Maybe a lot of people, in regards to retention, are like what Cliff was saying about entitlement, on the negative side of entitlement, about not entitled to the fruits. When someone says, you know what, my lodge should have got me a past master's apron. Where's my past master's apron? They get disgruntled. Eventually they leave the craft. Or other people looking for recognition when they're doing it, when we should be not doing it for the recognition. We should not be doing it. We should be doing it for the purity of the work, and that we're serving God and we're serving mankind. And when you're in that space of freedom of attachment, that's when you actually get the most. Like what St. Francis said, to give is to receive.
And with that, I remember the story. I think it was Oprah Winfrey, and She was going through a toll booth and she paid for I don't know how many cars behind her. And I remember like, wow, that was pretty cool, you know. So I think one time I paid for one person behind me. But the thing to resist is the payoff to my ego, because I felt good about that. And the thing is to just do the action and resist how good it makes me feel, you know. um uh, the idea is to do it for the benefit of others, not so that I could feel good, because then that's just stroking my own ego. And that's the hard part to resist, and that's probably hard for probably a lot of Westerners to do.
Yeah, I think especially in the West, we're really tied to this reward-based program, capitalism, manifest destiny. It's all very much tied into the fruits of your labor. But here Krishna is telling Arjun that you have the entitlement to do action. You have the entitlement to do things. But do not forget me. Do not forget the present moment. Always dwell in the present moment. And always remember that through your labor, you are an extension through me.
It's Saint Francis's prayer, Lord, let me be an instrument of yours, right?
Yeah.
Which is literally the chapter.
Yeah.
It's about doing that.
One of the greatest phrases I heard was from a book called The Dragon Doesn't Live Here Anymore by Alan Cohen. And he talked about service and investment. He said, if you hold a door open for someone, this is what you were saying, and they don't say thank you, and you get upset, well, that's
Yes.
an indication that you weren't really doing service. You were investing. Now, investing is good when it comes to your finances, but when it comes to doing service, it should have no place. So he says, the next time you hold a door open for someone and they don't say thank you, be grateful, because then you've done it for God.
Yes.
And God will pay you back much more than any human can. And I love that. That helps me, which was your brilliant insight about holding on to that feeling of being, again, the ego snapping back into place to chalk up another win for itself.
Yeah, it's the selfless service, which is an attitude across Freemasonry, of course. I think one of the things we noticed when we were going through the selections for tonight were that there are a lot of...
Yeah, there's a lot of the verses have the meaning reflects what we believe in Masonry, right?
Absolutely.
We don't, we don't go out in the world seeking members. We just do what we think is right. We live our truth. We live the best to our abilities, and people are drawn to that. And those are the people who find it, right? Um, I guarantee anybody who tries to do Masonry to get members, those members won't stick around.
Well, trying to do, again, it's this selfless service. Like when
Yes.
we're investing ourselves without expectations of reward, without expectations in general, again, we're present. And a lot of the secret in life is remembering we're already here with God. We don't need to go anywhere. We don't need to get anything more than just being here with that, being completely absorbed with the love of our Creator. And that's, for me, a lot of the heart of this text. Let's move on to verses 71 and 72, which conclude chapter 2. Krishna says, "They are forever free who renounce all selfish desires and break away from the ego cage of I, me, and mine to be united with the Lord. This is the supreme state. Attain to this and pass from death to immortality."
That passage, it reminded me of, the what our ancients called the eating of the eye. And I've seen the Mevlana dervishes on a number of occasions. And the last time I saw them, they gave a little talk before, and they wear these elongated fezzes. And he says, we wear these fezzes, these long fezzes, because it's a tombstone to our ego. And I really like that idea, the whole eating of the eye. and to try not to feed that particular animal. Again, that's the battle within, I think, a lot of the times, and for me, is trying not to feed the ego, the eating of the I. You know.
Yeah. It's called the fana, I think, in Sufism, the burning away of that self. I like, at the risk of getting a little too syncretic, we are talking about the Gita, which I think echoes a lot of wisdom from various religious traditions. In Buddhism, they call it nirvana, that it's like that extinguishing, right? In Sufism, it's that burning away of the soul. In the Gita, a lot of the Gita at least, it's about becoming free from what exists around you and attaining something that is eternal. It's awakening to something that you already have, right? It's interesting because I think a lot of Western religious traditions touch on this in various other ways. I wonder if maybe they don't take it quite far enough. Although I would say most of the saints' writings definitely do it justice, you know?
Well, I wonder if that's just a cultural thing, because I think that it's there. It's really there in the scripture. I think, though, it's the practice, it's the scripture in action
Yeah.
versus the scripture for the sake of words,
Yeah.
you know. But this brings us to just really holding renunciation as a thematic element here.
Right.
What do you guys feel is renunciation? How is this explained outside of the Gita? How is that practiced in our daily lives?
Would you like to go first?
I see we have a phrase, and don't panic because it's in English in the ritual book. It could be said publicly. When we divest our heart and consciousness of all the vices and superfluities of life. And it seems that one of the common denominators of all the paths that have effectively led humans to enlightenment and self-realization has been the learning of morality on what really is, what should be renounced. Should it be sex, or is it sex only in marriage? And there's different nuances and different levels to these things. And then sort of like how quantum physics just explodes the physical laws of Newton, Nisargadatta, who I call my guru, he basically said that, look, he says, I sold cigarettes most of my life, and I'm pretty sure I've caused a lot of harm for people, yet he attained the highest state of full self-realization. So for me, renunciation and purity and what this all means and how it all ties together with Freemasonry is less about a dogmatic don't do this and don't do that, but obtaining pure states of consciousness. Like to me, what I think is some of the definitions of enlightenment versus full self-realization, or enlightenment versus nirvana, depending what tradition we're referring to, is that in the first part, enlightenment is that you awaken to your true identity as there is no self, that all there is God shining through you. But that's not the end. That's just the beginning. To learn to dissolve the nervous system that's constantly distracting you from resting in that self-recognition is the rest of the journey. In which case, I think in India they would say full self-realization is the goal, is the end part of that. And in Buddhism, you would say nirvana, the extinction of all impulses that pull you out of that self-recognition. And so you can become enlightened, and you could lose it. And it's about getting it over and over again and doing all these things over and over again until you lose it. But again, like the private thing we said, if you're attached to it, it ain't going to happen. So you got to work for, if once you become enlightened, you got to work for self-realization or nirvana without wanting it.
It's the practice. It's the practice,
Or
the daily
being attached
practice
to
of
it.
it. So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. You have to that first glimpse, right? It's not meant to be the reward or the showing the the carrot, I guess. It's meant to show you that it's meant to give you that taste that this is real, this does work. You have to keep at it. It's that daily practice. And I like that you brought up the cigarettes as a vehicle. I often think about drinking as a vehicle. Cheers is a great example, right? Sam Malone is an alcoholic. He buys a bar. Why? Because it proves to himself that he is not ruled by the addiction. He has control over it, right? And I think this is the thing. Like the Gita talks about sannyasa, or like as renunciation, and also tyaga, right? So tyaga is sannyasa is putting the action down, not doing these things. So in this context, it'd be, okay, I have a drinking problem. I should not drink. I should not put myself in situations where I'm tempted to drink. And that is fine as a first step. That is fine if that's what you need, right? But I would say the ideal state is to not be influenced by it in the first place, to be able to get rid of that. And so for Sam Malone, that's that statement. I'm here, I'm not tempted by this. I set it aside, and I'm able to continue to do my actions, which is, running a business, providing a service for local people, etc.
That fits in perfectly what you said about, so that would be his method of dissolving the aversion
Right.
part of desire. And it reminds me of being a Mason, especially in Long Island. You're around a lot of alcohol.
Yeah.
And I can identify because I'm coming up on 36 years sober. So
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And it's
Yeah,
also very
a
fair.
Mason.
Yeah, you got a Mason, yes. It's also very fair to point out that I use the example as a vehicle. Of course, real addiction is a thing that requires focus, and there's multiple avenues of dealing with.
Yeah. Well, but I think going back to Western appreciation of scripture, and it's more of like words as opposed to action. How are we exemplifying the things that we're philosophizing? On the Eastern path, it's a lot about internalizing and doing the work within. The heart of the yoga tradition, I think, too, there's a misnomer as to what is yoga, what it pertains to, especially sannyasa and tyaga are these two both physical and mental practices of yoga that you could be doing every day and ought to be doing every day. Now, the mental state of detachment versus relinquishing attachment, I feel, are just kind of steps. Do you think that you can really relinquish attachment for everything without first physically separating yourself from it?
I think it's possible. I think there's a lot of circumstances that we don't stop doing and then realize we don't need to do it, but we can continue. I think that is, generally speaking, one way that we handle difficulties that we have. We take a break or separate ourselves from some of those actions when they have a strong effect on us to clear our minds, to understand, right? But in day-to-day life, I don't think that's the case most of the time, I think that this renunciating, this giving up, right? For me, I think of the word yagna. Yagna meaning the fire rite or the sacrifice. We have it's in our nature to be attached to things. And so giving up the attachment is a form of sacrifice. But continuing to do it is also fulfillment of your dharma. You can do both at the same time. It's that practice. You have to pick your battles. Days can be easy or days can be hard, right? So each action that we take in our day, you're not going to be able to practice tyaga on every single one. We're not beings of perfection. But in our journeys,
Not with that attitude.
Fair enough. But in our journeys, we can realize that these are two tools that we have, right? If we're feeling weakened or feel like we might be susceptible to some of these temptations that are in life, then, sannyasa, or setting it aside and not doing the action whatsoever, is better than not doing anything, or worse, going towards it, right?
It reminds me of the fourfold path of in Buddhism, that to understand suffering exists, but then understand it's possible to remove that suffering, but you have to identify what that is
Yeah.
and actively stop doing it. And of course, the Eightfold Path gives you the process as to how to conduct yourself, how to mentally move away from it, so that you live by a much more righteous standard.
There's a Buddhist parable of two monks and the woman, right? So two monks are out for the day into venture to a city. They're leaving to get back to the monastery, so they come across a river, and a woman is there saying, "Please, can you help me cross this river?" The one monk says, "No, it's against our custom. We have taken vows of celibacy, so I can't touch you." The other monk basically says, "Sure, hop on my shoulders, I'll carry you across." Carries her across. He sets her down. She goes on her way, and the first monk wants to say something, but he holds back. Maybe it's a judgment call that he had to make, or maybe it's maybe a difference of opinion or something. Anyway, they're walking back towards the monastery, and several times along this journey, he stops and he wants to say something, but he doesn't. So they get to the gate of the monastery, and the first monk says, "Okay, hold on. Before we go in, I have to ask you, why did you pick up that woman? We're not supposed to do that." And the other monk says, "What woman?" And the first one says, "The one by the river." And he says, "I put her down by the river. Why are you still carrying her?"
It's brilliant.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
It's such a simple and very clean way of talking
wow.
about renunciating this.
It's so difficult to use words and scenarios sometimes, because what we're talking about really is transcends words and thoughts and terms. And so there's so many different things that you could say that will accentuate a point, and then there's always a counteraction to that if you hold on to that too much.
Right.
I think this is a great segue into our next quote, which is from chapter 5, verses 22 through 25. Pleasures conceived in the world of the senses have a beginning and an end, and give birth to misery, Arjuna. The wise do not look for happiness in them, but those who overcome the impulses of lust and anger which arise in the body are made whole and live in joy. They find their joy, their rest, and their light completely within themselves. Unified with the Lord, they attain nirvana in Brahman. Healed of their sins and conflicts, working for the good of all beings, the holy sages attain nirvana in Brahman. So this passage resonates with me, and I think largely because it seems to parallel aspects, again, of Freemasonry. And we've spoken about this already a little bit. I wonder if you guys think it's more pertinent to discuss that further, or is it more pertinent to talk about Brahman, the Godhead? I think that's another thing that a lot of the Western audience may find a little bit hard to embrace. What is Brahman? Is that different than a Brahman? What's exactly at the heart of this passage, Yatri?
So Brahman is this state that's, I think, more clearly elucidated in the Vedic corpus, in the Upanishads, of divinity. When we look at Hinduism from the outside, it often seems like we're polytheistic, henotheistic, something like that. But the secret of the Veda is Sadamek Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. Sadamek, there's one truth, and the wise call it by many names. So from this perspective, using different names and different forms of deity is a tool, is an advantage for us, because trying to use abstract ideas is, like we were just saying, difficult. And having illustrations via stories and other things helps us understand better. And so Brahman is that one truth that underlies all things. And so all other divinities are basically emanations from that. A Brahmana, or Brahmin as we often say, right? Obviously, it's someone of the priestly caste. It has a lot of other connotations, but ultimately, it's someone who knows or has seen Brahman. We would say someone who has Brahmagyana, the knowledge of Brahman.
Mm.
That's the way idealistically it should be, right? A teacher can show you what they know. They can't directly show you something that they don't know, right?
I think it's an important distinction when brothers are considering someone from the lodge. There's a misunderstanding that a lot of people think that Hinduism is polytheistic. It's not. I always tell them it's polyamorphic, where they're all manifestations of the same divine being. They believe in a supreme being. They believe we're all one, which seems to be the precursor to this verse, is saying that, look, when you're seeking pleasure, right, it's because you're identifying as a fake individual, something that doesn't exist. But when you are identified with God and you're thinking of God, well, then you transcend it all. And that's the whole underlining point.
Right.
That if we're acting under the false identification as an individual and we don't affect anything else and we're not connected to anyone else, that's where the problems start. And like Socrates said, any action dedicated to pleasure always leads back to pain, and vice versa. And that's why, is because we're all one in God. And so it has to always come back to that one central point of worshiping God, which is the only being that exists in the universe. Everyone else is a manifestation of that.
Cliff, how do you feel this pertains to like aspects of the first degree and like polishing your ashlar, divesting yourself of the senses? Like we appreciate the sensual pleasures of life, but if we get confused by them, clearly it brings us anguish.
Um, that's a tricky one. I think, you know, just living in New York City is a challenge. I worked with a group one time in Canada. It was a Rosicrucian group, and they said, Cliff, how can you be spiritual in New York City? And I told them, I said, it's not easy. It's just being in a city like this, trying to keep your ashlar smooth is a challenge. It's a constant challenge. It's very difficult. I'm a native New Yorker. You know, just a ride on any MTA vehicle, bus or train will challenge your sense of spirituality. So it's a it's a constant. I mean, for me, you know, I have to constantly be conscious of it. I have to constantly, you know, work on my passions and keeping them within that circle. You know, be that point within the circle and keep my passions in due bounds. Um, and I use a number of tools, you know, to try to enable to do that. And those tools are basically either things that I might be a member of and the lessons learned therein. And as we're talking here, I think some of the things that I do belong to, they probably reached back in time to things like the Gita, incorporated that into a lot of 18th century thinking.
Yeah, well, that just in itself too is something I'm fascinated with. Is when I hear, "Why did you leave the West to travel east?" To me, it's um, leaving Western philosophy and practice to understand Eastern philosophy and practice, to then return to the West and see how that reflects for your culture. Freemasonry as a Western initiatic system traditionally uh, grew up within the confines of the 17th century. And what's going on in the 17th century? Well, I believe in 1600 we have the East Indian Trading Company. We have the British Empire invading India, the Indian Peninsula, and a lot of that culture all of a sudden is now being, I don't want to say stolen, but streamlined right to the crown.
Appropriated.
appropriated for the British Empire. So it would have been very in vogue at the time, the mythology of the Far East. And in the mid 1600s, when speculative Freemasonry, what was called accepted Freemasonry, was defining itself as this system to discuss the unobservable universe through a system of symbols and allegory that we could all agree pertain to some sort of underlying perennial philosophy without stepping on anybody's toes.
Yep.
I, for one, think that a lot of the conversation and a lot of what we are on about awakening within ourselves, if not directly pertains to the Gita, is certainly absorbed with the teachings of the Upanishads, the other Hindu mythologies, and Far Eastern doctrines like Buddhism, Taoism, etc.
Yeah, I think even at one point, Madame Blavatsky called her theosophy the yoga of the West, hinting that she drew on Eastern philosophies in order to create her branch of theosophy for her order.
Michael, what do you think about Freemasonry's influence by the Bhagavad Gita?
I think it's hard to say the direct connection because it looks like the Gita is sort of like the flame that lit it all. Even though there's a lot of multiple texts in the Hindu tradition, but the Gita is like one small book that if there's anything that you're gonna read and you can only read one small book, here's the message. Will do its trick. It's what fascinates me is how so many fundamentalists in the great religions have squelched the real message of the Gita, that being we're all one in God, and He's the real doer, and He's the real actor, and the ego and personal history is an illusion, is that what I just said is actually in all those religions that actively, violently squelch that one truth within it. And you could just go and like, I'm a Roman Catholic, so I'll use the Catholic Church for instance, which is usually the first institution they usually bring up in condemning this, right? But it's not only in the Bible. You don't even have to go to the obscure texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi library. It's in the Bible. A handful of texts I'll give you, but it's also in Catholic mystical theology. It's also in the Hesychast tradition, in deification of the Greek and Russian Orthodox. So it's there. It's also in Sufism. So it's the hardliners, people that are overwhelmed with administering an enormous organization that seem to lose patience with the ultimate truth. It's not any particular religion or institution that squelches this. And so to me, Freemasonry stands as an exoteric fraternity that allows every soul on planet Earth the freedom to explore the esoteric meaning of their life. And I can prove it. We're in the library. And we have artifacts to prove this.
I think you're right in that it's a good vehicle, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned the word appropriation earlier. My opinion of Blavatsky, at least, same thing with Golden Dawn. A lot of those traditions take what we consider to be closed practices from Hinduism, namely tantric or Shaivite practices, and then repackage them. And I think there's an inherent danger in that because there's context that you just don't have. And even if you have it when you adapt it, you're one person. And these things have so many layers. You need some answer for every layer. The Gita is that text where if you have no context of Hinduism, you can still pick up and read and get something very, very good out of. So it gets away from needing that context. But as a vehicle, I think in Hinduism, we would be very bold and say, you are God. You know, Tattvamasi, you are that. That statement in a vacuum feels very blasphemous to most people in the West. And so using the symbolism that we have, using Freemasonry as a vehicle to understand and explore and arrive at this conclusion yourself by experiencing it yourself is, it makes for a more accepted way of getting at this truth without I would say maybe the baggage that's associated with the tradition. I mean, not to say we have plenty of our own baggage as well, right? I mean, everyone does. Every culture does. You see it in different places, but in the simpleness of that sentence of I am that, or that is me. We are one.
Emerson resolves it
Mm,
by saying,
very true.
of course, saying I am God is arrogance. The truth is, God is I.
Yeah.
And that resolves the question, because if you're acting from the ego or the small self or the untrue self, I am God could be arrogance. I mean, I guess what it comes to is that when you have this realization, I am God. If you're in India, I'll smack you in the back of the head and say, "What took you so long?" But if you say it again, then it might be arrogance.
Yeah.
It's an understanding that shows you the way, right? That's the light that we see that takes us, but that is not the goal in and of itself, is to be God. The goal in and of itself is not to, the goal is actually to accrue the ability to dwell in that state at all times.
To be completely absorbed in a state of samadhi, to be
Yes.
completely absorbed in that realization. Yoga is the balance between body and mind, and finding and holding on to that at all times. You know you are God. But if you have already done the work of renunciation, then what is that anyway? What is that thought anyway?
Right.
As the last quote for today that opens the final chapter, or not final, on chapter 13, not 18.
Final for us today, yeah.
For today is, the body is called a field, Arjuna. The one who knows it is called the knower of the field. This is the knowledge of those who know. I'm going to keep reading.
Go ahead, yeah.
I am the knower of the field in everyone, Arjuna. Knowledge of the field and its knower is true knowledge. And then Krishna goes on to explain this in depth. But I love that verse. If there is a moment in the Gita where it all just was like, oh,
The aha moment, yes.
that is it.
Yeah.
That is it. To understand in the larger spectrum, the layers of the Bhagavad Gita. Here's Arjuna fighting against all of his extended family for righteousness, him and his siblings, to standing up against their 100 cousins and the extended family, who are all just trying to do what they believe is right. Is this larger picture of the individual as the knower of the field against all of their senses, all of their perceptions, all of their thoughts, all the invasive things that are going on around us in the day-to-day. And then on such an individual level, here's Krishna saying this beautiful metaphor that you are the seat of consciousness amongst all of your senses and all of your passions and all of your perceptions, Arjuna. And I, too, am that seat of consciousness. And we are that seat of consciousness together. So let us sit here and watch the field and understand that it is separate from us.
I love that the framework of the story layers this, because there's two armies facing each other, and Arjuna says, because Krishna is his charioteer, he's sworn not to take up arms in this war, and Arjuna says, I need you to guide me. So he's a driver, and he tells Krishna, take me to the middle of the field so I can see what I'm surrounded by. And so it's the two of them in the middle of an empty field where the armies are gathered outside, right? And tell me that's not the perfect image of our body and the seed, right? It tells you Arjuna and Krishna. Arjuna's you. I am Arjuna, right? But I am also Krishna. We are together in that space.
Yeah.
And the field that we're surrounded by, the war that we have to face every day in the actions that life requires of us, like it's a geometric way to look at, a spatial way to look at it.
Yeah.
Not to mention the chariot.
Yes, of course.
Chariot's the
senses and
the self, and the horses are the senses, and so it's pretty profound. I have a question? Does Arjuna know that his charioteer is God incarnate
yes,
in the very, very beginning?
yes. So this
Or was it revealed early on?
so this touches on a lot of different things, because historically Vaishnavism comes about, and progressively we see this go from a story with these characters into something more, right? So Krishna does, by the time we see the Gita come around, in the framework of the story, Arjuna knows that Krishna is beloved to him, a dear friend, and holy. But it isn't until chapter 12 that he realizes just how holy, right? I mean, it's one thing to know, but to be given divine sight and see the awe-inspiring, frightening full image, that's a whole different level of understanding, right?
He's not just a self-realized soul. This is God in its fullest, most complete sense.
Even in the plot of Mahabharata, there is a celebration where Krishna, in front of everybody, is deemed the holiest of holies. And so it is no secret, not even among the Pandavas and Arjuna, knowing that Krishna is this. But I think, again, and there's a part where Arjuna is apologizing to Krishna for not being so reverent to him in general, where it really touches on the realization that he is actually now accepting, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the divinity of his closest friend and confidant.
It's he says, forgive me for the transgressions I may have committed by understanding you as my friend. And Krishna essentially says, between friends, there's no apology here, right? And that valid approach of approaching God as a friend is exemplified by the Gita up until that point, you know? And I think that is also something that we see, like Swami Vivekananda also, many of the people who have that holy understanding, while they are reverent of God, they also speak of him as a near and dear friend, someone that, you know, they might converse with, right? In a lot of, honestly, the way Moses is referenced and in his interactions with God, it feels the same, right?
Well,
Just know them.
And even in the Eleusinian rites, is appreciating Demeter as this mother of spring and nature. It was like, I forget the word, but essentially in Greek it means cultivating the friendship with divinity. It's like you have the relationship with this higher Godhead spirit, but not is it just a philosophical idea. You live that relationship at any moment. And going back to our question earlier between the yogas and how do we access that state? And it's as easy as just remembering, connecting with the present moment and remembering that you have a friend in God. You are God. But as that aspect is in itself much larger than what your ego is, you must have your relationship with God.
Isn't that a quote from, who is it, Silesius? I am like God and God like I. I cannot above him nor he beneath me be.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Silesius or something like that.
And Jesus telling his disciples at the Last Supper, you know, I'm paraphrasing poorly, about, you know, I am your teacher and rightly so, and you call me master and rightly so, but now you're not just my disciples, I call you friends. It's such an intimate, transcending relationship that God is your friend. I'm not really sure it's comprehensible. And we shouldn't harden on a feeling for that. That should just take us all the way. Just that statement,
Yeah.
because it's about love
Mm.
and mutual recognition. It's not about a false sense of perfection.
Mhm. Well, and what I love too is the tenderness of the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
The Lord's song it's Krishna through this entire process of counseling Arjuna's through loving kindness. It's such a
As they
beautiful.
march into violence.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, he does. He starts.
To see it's both perfection, the duality and the non-duality at the exact same time is
Yeah.
profound. The extremes,
Kuru-
embracing the extremes.
Kurukshetra
Unbelievable.
is the battle that marks the change from the last era into Kali
the Kali
Yuga,
Yuga, yeah.
right? Yeah.
So it's not the battle itself, but the
Okay.
battle is the major demarcation of the end of the last era. There's a little bit that goes on, and before things change.
Sure.
But essentially, I mean, the framework of the Mahabharata, right, the story, is that this is being told to Arjuna's great grandson, the history of where he comes from. But the whole text was written before it ever happened by Vyasa, the great seer who has compounded or cataloged the Vedas into a corpus, right? So he's seen it all before it happens, and it kind of plays out as he says, right? But that's not important. What's important is that the delivery. It's in the delivery of who it's given to, and so, it's so interesting to me in terms of choice, because we are meant to be Arjuna when reading the Gita, but Arjuna is not. I would say he's not even one of the top 5 protagonists in the larger framework text of the Mahabharatas, because you have Krishna and Balarama, you have Draupadi who's the transgression against whom starts the whole aspect of war. You have Yudhishthira, who is the rightful king, right? But for this moment, and I think that's where it comes down to, because at the very beginning, if we were to get this as a story in one sitting, right? The same way that the story is recited to, I think it's Parikshita, but Abhimanyu's son. We're meant to be that. And because we can trace that lineage in ourselves back to Arjuna, that is also us. And it's got layers there, which I like, in that, the X begot X kind of way that we see in a lot of texts.
And we're also the enemies and the adversaries at the exact same time.
Exactly. It's easier to get that message when we feel that we are the ones who are wronged, or we are the ones who have to raise our arms. But that's the ultimate truth, is we are also the transgressors. We are also the ones who have already been raining terror upon ourselves, right? Krishna says this overtly, So that's a harder truth to swallow up front. But, he gives it to us with that tenderness, like you said.
I don't think people can evolve and become enlightened in a harmonious environment. No one goes to the gym and lifts 1 pound.
Yeah.
And so hopefully we get an incarnation that matches our abilities to work this stuff out. But I mean, maybe that's the mystery of the cross, one of the most extreme violent actions. And he's also having the most compassionate consciousness at the same time, asking the Father to forgive them for the people that betrayed him and did this to him at the exact same time.
It exemplifies the exact action. I work with yajamanas, people on behalf of whom I perform rituals and things. But they also reflect this a lot when they're telling me about their lives, that real spiritual change is not calm. It is the tower from the tarot. It is all upheaving. It is shaking. It is breaking, and it is violent. And that is the violence that we see, really.
It's joy is the lotus that blooms from the soil of our suffering.
Yes.
We cannot respect or appreciate peace without the underlying chaos that we bleed. With that, what a joy to be able to speak with you all tonight, my brothers, about the Bhagavad Gita, by this translation by Eknath Eswaran. Eswaran. This is my favorite translation, and I highly recommend the book. I appreciate each of you today for coming to the table to speak about this text at length, to discuss how it pertains to our gentle craft, and how the larger Hindu tradition is something that ought to be appreciated and recognized as something worthy to be placed upon our altar as well.
And our brothers have a right to that. That's the other thing I like to point out.
Amen. I'm the host here tonight, Brother Jason Walter Short, and on behalf of our Grandmaster and Craftsmen Online, I want to say thank you, and here is our Grandmaster, Stephen Adam Rubin, to close us out.
My brother, we are each on our own journey, but it doesn't change with the color of our aprons, the initials that precede our name, or the numbers that follow. Yet too often, too much of our Masonic experience is consumed by the mundane yet necessary work of attending to the business of our lodges. While the social and charitable aspects of our craft are cherished parts of our tradition, they too can command an inordinate share of our time and efforts. But what of improving ourselves as men and Masons? There is an undeniable thirst in modern Freemasonry for the esoteric knowledge entrusted to the care of well-informed brethren. For as long as the craft has existed, brethren have gathered together within lodges and without to exchange, share, offer Masonic insights, thoughts, and ideas. So I congratulate you, my brother, for your inquisitive mind, and thank you for joining us for Craftsmen Online's Reading Room, where Masonic scholars are always welcomed.